I'm surprised at how frequently I get the same questions from clients ready to make big life changes. They usually start with a heavy focus on tactics. How can I make this change? And I find that really interesting because 99% of people would benefit from focusing on the what and the why. In this video, I'll walk you through the exact step-by-step process that I use with clients who are ready to make a fresh start. If we've never met before, hi, my name is Dr. Jamie. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist who's focused on performance optimization for the last 12 years. And today I got my big water. I suggest you grab a coffee, a notebook, and let's get into it. Figuring out what's really important to you is going to help you make decisions in all sorts of places in your life. And in this process, it's going to help us focus on what you actually want to spend your time and energy trying to improve. There's a reason that values are central to several types of therapy and essential to things like goal setting theory. And that's because values are a bit of a cheat code in both behavioral health and behavioral change. Values are your North Star. They can serve as a guiding principle, and it can help you make decisions easier and faster, and you might even be more satisfied with those decisions. When you know what's important to you, what really matters in your life, and what you think is good, it's easy for you to pick the right goals, and it's easy for you to stay on track. Since values are such an important part of big behavioral changes or life resets, we dedicate a lot of time and effort in truly understanding them within this step-by-step process. That means completing 4 activities that all come together to give you a good understanding of your current values. As a behavioral scientist and someone trained in behaviorally focused therapies, I always want some sort of behavioral measure that's going to capture what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. For that, I use the VIA Character Strength Survey developed by the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll leave a link down below. I really like this measure because it has quite a variety of character strengths. It identifies 24 character strengths, and it ultimately presents you with a character strengths profile, meaning some of the things at the very top of your list are things that you tend to be very good at. On the bottom end of the list isn't necessarily things that you're bad at, they just tend to be relative weaknesses. Although, when you look at mine, you know that I'm bad at the ones at the bottom. The next exercise in seeking out your values is an internal ideal exercise. You do this by looking at a list of values. I have one in my free values Notion workbook. I'll link that down below, but there are also publicly available lists of common values. James Clear has a good one on his website, and it's also part of some therapy workbooks, like this acceptance and commitment-based therapy workbooks. They tend to have really good values lists. Once you find a list that looks good to you, you'll read down the list and start identifying individual words that stick out as things that might be important to you. If you're anything like me or the people that I work with, you might find that you're circling 10 or 15 value words. That's totally normal, and when you have more than 10 or 15 value words, they tend to cluster around different core values. I might point out things like accountability, discipline, and competence. Those 3 values cluster together around a concept of mastery, which I know has historically been one of my core values. I try to narrow down my values list into 5 or 6 words that capture most of the words that stuck out to me. We focused on your behavior and your internal state. Now let's focus on those around you. The next activity focuses around who you admire the most. What types of qualities do you like about them? How are you similar or different than that person? What's appealing about their life circumstances? And what can you learn from them? Finally, my favorite question that tends to tell me a lot about people as well as myself is, what is your proudest moment? The most common response I hear is something like the birth of my child, which says that the person values family. Others focus on a big graduation or a moment that demonstrates how much they value educational attainment. My proudest moment in life is really niche. It was when I was named a semifinalist in the Intel Science Search. Unless you're a science nerd like me, you might not know that the Intel Science Search, at least back when I was in high school, was known as the Junior Nobel Prize. And this moment was particularly meaningful for me since I had submitted my work as a behavioral scientist and I was up against other physical scientists, and I still placed in this national science competition. After that, I had a full scholarship to college. I earned a PhD and a full fellowship from a top 10 research university. I've been published in over a dozen medical journals and 3 book chapters later, and that is still my proudest moment. That really says something about me. I like doing things that are hard. I like doing things that are a little against the grain. That was definitely not what most 17-year-olds were focusing on in high school. And then I went on to be like a weird 20-year-old getting my PhD. So it just says something about what I thought was important and really meaningful to me. After going through these 4 exercises, most people have everything that they need to put together and start to understand their top 3 to 6 values. I tend to hover around 6. Any more than that, I start to find some redundancies. Now, values tend to be relatively stable, but there is some movement, especially over long periods of time. I tend to do a values reassessment about once a year. If you're interested in checking out my entire process that I went through last year, I'll leave that linked up above. And if you're interested in walking through this assessment live with me in real time, I'll be hosting a free webinar on November 1st, where I'll be walking you through my process and answering your questions totally for free. More information, including the link to the waitlist, is down below. Now that we know what's important to you on a theoretical basis, let's take an inventory of what you're actually doing and how you're actually spending your time. That's your roles and responsibilities. There's a really simple way for you to understand everything that's expected of you, all of the roles and responsibilities that you're taking across all of your life domains. Start with a blank weekly calendar. I have a free one linked down below. And you're going to walk through this calendar and simply ask yourself, what do I do on a typical week? As you walk through what you're doing on a typical weekday as well as a typical weekend, you'll start to understand the full spectrum of your roles and responsibilities. Let's take my Monday, for example. First, I wake up and then I go to the gym. So I know that I am a living, breathing creature that requires a sleep-wake cycle. I go to the gym, so I am someone that is taking care of their physical health, or at least attending to their physical health. Then I shower and I answer email. Showering has to do with self-care. I'm answering email because I have a regular 9-to-5 job. On Monday mornings, I see patients in my work as a psychologist, and in the afternoon during my deep work block, I'm usually doing something related to behavioral science. Then I pick up my kid and I work on my YouTube channel, which means that I am a wife as well as a content creator. I take Japanese lessons. Those happen once a week, and that has to do with personal growth and development. Usually I throw in some laundry before I start those classes, so I have to take care of my physical spaces as well as my physical objects, my clothes, and then I do a little 10-minute cleanup before turning into bed. After I go through this process every day of the week, I have a pretty holistic picture of the different life domains, which is what I call these groups of roles and responsibilities. This is what mine looked like last year. You'll see that I have health and fitness, and that encompasses the things that I do in the gym or regarding meal prep or things I need to do to feed myself. Personal growth, so that's my hobbies and my language learning. I also have finances because it's just part of these administrative tasks. I have a section called physical environments because I own a house and a car and things, and those things make demands of me. I have a house, which means I have to clean it. I have a car, which means I have to do maintenance on it. And every object that I have requires some sort of energy for me to maintain, even if it's just housing it within my space. And I also have the productivity psychologist because this is a big part of my life as well. Now that you know your life domains, we could get to the somewhat uncomfortable part of rating how you're doing in each life domain. This means that you're going to give yourself a grade from 1 to 10. In order to have some sort of guidance on how you're going to rate yourself, it's important that you identify your idealized state in each of these life areas. That means, what does a 10 look like for you in the area of friends and family? What does a 10 look like for you if you have an area like physical spaces? Let's roll with physical spaces. I like to keep a very tidy house. So a 10 out of 10 means that everything has a place and everything is in its place in my home. I keep a very suspect car. In fact, my husband comments on it every time he passes it in the driveway. I just do not care about the cleanliness level in my car. And I'm gonna take it to get its oil change every quarter, but I probably never change the cabin filter forever. But on the other hand, I really care about what the inside of our cupboards look like, even though no one will ever see it. So finding your 10 in each of these life domains is going to start to flesh out the picture of what is actually important to you. What does right look like in your life? And that's going to be really different from person to person, which is why even though I love using these wheel of life to do my assessment of my different life domains, I never use one of the many pre-filled ones that you can find online. Because sure, for most people, these life domains or these life areas are pretty consistent with what they have in their life. It's not tailor-made for you. We're all about individualized processes here because what's important to me is probably really different than what's important to you. Now we have all of the key components to be able to know what types of changes we want to make at the end of 2025 or into 2026. We know what matters to you, what's being asked of you, and how you're performing in all of those life areas. Now that we have these three components, we can be better at identifying what types of changes we want to make. First, it helps if any shift that you want to make is aligned with your identified values. When you select goals that are consistent with your values, they tend to be more sustainable over time because you're intrinsically motivated to do things that you actually care about. And I know that I've personally fallen into this trap when I'm thinking about goals for the coming year. Sometimes I find myself failing over and over again when I have a specific goal. And when I stop and ask myself, is this something that even matters to me? Or maybe it was something that mattered to me 3 years ago when I first started this goal, but it doesn't matter to me right now. That is part of the reason why you continuously fail at goals. Because sometimes we identify a shift or a change that really isn't relevant to us anymore, or we really don't care about it. Now that we have your current values, we can align the goals or changes that you want to make to be consistent with those values. We also have your roles and responsibilities, and we know how well we're doing in those roles and responsibilities. So we have a choice to make here. Do we want to protect what's working by making tiny changes, moving us from an 8 to a 9, or maybe even a 9 to a 10? Or do we want to focus on domains where the levels are critically low, things that we've been ignoring or maybe just know that we need to pay more attention to because they are so far from our idealized state that it's worth taking some time and energy to really make a focused effort at improving those life areas. The last thing I encourage people to think about, and something I think about myself, is whether or not I can identify any ripple goals. That's goals that might have a positive impact on multiple life domains. That's things like improving my sleep. That could have an immediate impact on my health and fitness, as well as things like my acuity at work or my attentiveness to this channel. Once we've identified our goals, we're halfway there. Yes, just halfway. When you've identified a goal, I want you to think of this acronym, GPS. First, you start with a goal. Then you're going to identify a plan to meet that specific goal. Now, this is when it's important to do a little bit of research. If you have a specific goal, it's likely that someone out there has mastered this goal in the past. And although there's a place for learning from personal experimentation, there's also something to be said from learning from the masters and the experts. If my goal was to improve my sleep, I would first want to define what I mean by improve. Do I really mean that I want longer sleep duration? Do I want increased sleep quality? And what do I mean by that? Do I want to wake up feeling well rested? How am I going to define that? Once you've fully defined your goal, now you could get to Googling and starting to understand what the experts have said about how to actually reach that goal. Let's focus on the goal of increased sleep duration. That happens to be an area well studied in the scientific literature. I would suggest that you start with Google Scholar, put in increased sleep duration. You could also put in some keywords to increase the quality of the results. Things like meta-analysis, which is a study of other studies, and it gives you a good overall understanding of what the majority of studies say and how big of an impact specific interventions or behaviors have on sleep duration. Or you can look up randomized controlled trial, and that's going to give you information on a group of people that are roughly the same in a series of variables, and once they tried to do a certain thing, the impact that it had on those different groups. Understanding how to critically evaluate research studies is central to my work as a scientist, but it's also something I'm interested in sharing with the world. So if that's something that you think you might want to see in a future video, please leave a comment section in the comments section down below, or leave this video a thumbs up so that I know that you all are my people and we can nerd out together in the future. Okay, so far we have a goal and a plan. Next, we're going to need a system to execute that plan. Here are 3 evidence-based plans to increasing your sleep duration. First, it's helpful to have a consistent sleep schedule. Second, it's helpful to sleep in a dark room. And lastly, it's beneficial to keep your room at an optimal, slightly cold temperature. Now, let's set up a system for all 3 of those plans. First, I'm going to plan to go to bed at 9 o'clock every day. Then I'm going to make sure that my TV is off before 9 and that I have curtains that effectively block out all external light. Then I'm going to set up my thermostat to go down to 66 degrees at about 8:45. Now I have a full architecture to support that behavioral change. And that includes not just the goal, but also the plan and the system to support that, mostly on autopilot. Ideally, you'll have the systems that make it super easy for you to follow the plan. But sometimes there's systems that don't just work on autopilot. And that's where tracking comes in. Tracking is another strategy that's used in both therapy and in goal setting theory. And that's because tracking has this kind of magical power. It both increases the behaviors that you are trying to increase and decreases the behaviors that you're trying to decrease. That could be seen in studies where people are really motivated to maintain behavioral chains, things like crossing off a day in the calendar or your Duolingo streak. On the other hand, studies where people are trying to decrease negative behaviors like smoking also show that tracking the amount of cigarettes you smoke decreases the amount of cigarettes that you smoke. And I'll take all of the benefits that I can get from tracking, but I also want to use it for a deeper purpose. When you track, you're able to catch yourself in the event that you need to course correct as you're moving toward large life changes. A lot of the big goals that we're trying to get to or the life resets that we're trying to make in the coming year are going to involve long periods of sustained effort. When you're moving toward a target that's far away, it helps to have a compass to guide you as well as some sort of indicator that you're getting off track. And that's where review, reflection, and reset practices come into play. Part of major life shifts or just general life organization revolve around understanding how frequently you need to be checking in on different areas of your life. I might need to check in on my weight or my calories on a daily basis. I might only need to check on my paper file organization system once a year. This deeper level work, along with an overall life organization system, is key to both making change and sustaining change over time. These concepts are so important that I've made individual videos on both. You can check out this video on different review and reflection cycles, or you can check out this video on a personal life organization system. And if you're interested in checking out how I'm starting this process for 2026, or want any of your questions answered on how you can move through this process, check out the link for the free webinar down below.